In this video, we're going to take a look at the newest release from the folks over at On1, the On1 Photo Raw 2022 editing software. But I'm going to approach it from a slightly different perspective than many other reviewers. I'm going to give you my views on the program as a new user. I'll cover both the good and the bad, as well as possibly the ugly. Hi, I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor, and I teach beginner and intermediate photographers just like you how to take your photography to the next level, right from capture in camera all the way through to the photo editing process and the final image. Ready to check out On1 Photo Raw 2022? Stick around and I'll give you the pros and the cons straight up. Let's get started. Before I get started, I want to just give you a little bit of background about me and my experience with photo editing and photo editing software. I've been a photographer for over 33 years, and I've been working with Photoshop since about 1995. That's version 3, not CS3, 3. So I've been doing this for a while. I'm also familiar and have used Corel Paint Shop Pro in the past, as well as I've been using Lightroom since 2006 when it was first introduced as a beta version, and all of Skylum's products since they began as McFun in 2008. So I've gotten in on a lot of photo editing products on the ground floor, and what I like to do is approach them from the aspect of how easy are they to use without having to read the manual or watch a bunch of videos to do some education on the software first. You'd probably agree with me if you've ever tried to use Photoshop that the learning curve on Photoshop is straight up. So I'd like to use that as a benchmark to see how easy other programs are to just use intuitively. I've previously done a review of several different programs, including On1 Photo Raw 2018. So I wanted to see how it compared to the things that I reviewed it for back then. So let's take a look at the new version and see if they've made some improvements based on the critiques that I had from 3 years ago. If you're a current user of On1 Photo Raw, you'll want to make sure that you update to this latest version. If you are a paid subscription member, meaning you pay for it annually, then you get this upgrade for free. If you purchased the last version as a one-time fee, then you would have to pay an upgrade fee. One benefit of On1 Photo Raw right off the top is that you get to choose whether you want to pay annually and always have the most current version and not worry about it, or just buy it once and pay for it and then upgrade only when you choose. So the choice is yours, which is nice. To get started with On1 Photo Raw 2022, I first opened up the program and added a few images. I did not read the manual and I have not watched any tutorial videos to start, with a couple of exceptions, because I did find that the user interface is still a little bit confusing and not as intuitive as I'd like it to be. So I did have to resort to looking some things up on YouTube and to dig into the user manual to figure out how to do a couple of things. I'll show you those as we go along. Please keep in mind, when I'm talking about is this intuitive, I have over 25 years experience using different photo editing programs. So if I don't find it intuitive, what are the chances that you might find it intuitive and easy to use if you have less experience than I do? My first impression when I opened up the program was that it was still a little bit confusing. This is what I saw with no images when I first opened it, and I had to figure out how to add some images. By clicking on this, you can add a single photo, browse a folder, or catalog your photos. So I had to do some digging on the catalog issue because I wasn't quite sure 100% whether or not On1 Photo Raw is a database-based program like Lightroom and Luminar, or if it was more of a single image editor like Photoshop. The conclusion that I came to is that it's a combination of both, which is a little bit confusing. The other thing I noticed is that there's a lot of things that you can click on in this main sort of window, in this main browser window. There's things down the left here. You have browse, edit, layers, pano, HDR, focus, and time. Then down here, there's resize, print, share, and export. If I click on this bottom one, I get a side panel. And what I didn't realize was that I was missing a left side panel. And this is where I actually had to resort to joining a Facebook group for On1 users to find out why I wasn't seeing what other people were seeing. They kept talking about these tabs here, and I wasn't sure why they were seeing it and I wasn't. So it wasn't clear right off the bat that these panels by default are hidden. You can also show them by clicking the tab button. But again, that wasn't super intuitive to me, and I didn't think to press the button because I didn't know what I was missing. Another thing you might notice is that the font I find is very small and in some places hard to read. I've actually lowered the resolution on my monitor so that I can make it bigger on the screen just for you to be able to see it. But this is not the normal resolution that I work with. If I change it to my normal resolution, let me do that and show you how small it is. This is the regular or default resolution for my MacBook Pro 13-inch screen. It's 1792 by 1120 pixels. If you have a screen resolution that is even higher, like I do on my 27-inch monitor, the font and the text will be even smaller. So I found it very hard to read, especially in some of the places where I went into the edit module. You tell me, are these things easy to read? I had to get closer to the screen to read it in many cases. So that was a con for me. If you wear glasses or have aged eyes like I do and need progressive lenses, you may find that this font is really small and hard to read as well. The second half of my first impression of the program is that it has a lot of potential and some advanced tools. So it has things like HDR, and you can see that I used these three to merge a new HDR image, and it did a really good job. It also has stitch to pano, and I did a stitched pano as well from these three images. It also has focus stacking abilities as well as time lapse. Now, I don't do a lot of those things, so I don't have those to show you, but if that's something that you do, you'll find these tools helpful. One other tool that a lot of people who use Luminar 4 missed when they upgraded to Luminar AI was the ability to use layers. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video when I give you my recommendations on who this program is for and who I think is not for and should avoid it. Let's take a look at some of the things that I had problems with or the cons when I reviewed this program 3 years ago. The first one I want to mention is the history. They do have a history panel, and the fact is that it may have been there 3 years ago, but I could not find it for the life of me. So there is a history panel now, and I still had trouble finding it. I even searched under help for history, and you'll notice if I do that, it doesn't find anything. So I had to dig into the manual to see if there was a history tool, and I found that it's up at the top of this panel here in the edit module. You can see that there's nothing in the history. But if I do a before and after by clicking this preview button, you can see that there has been some editing done to this photo in this software. So the history gets erased when you save or click done in this case and close the program. So in that aspect, it's like Photoshop, right? If you don't save your image in Photoshop, your edits are gone. But if you save a layered file, you have all the layers and everything that you could continue to work on non-destructively, but your history that you worked on and everything that you did previously is not available. That seems to be the case here. So it's not like Lightroom or Luminar where you can actually go back to any of your edits even after you close the program. So just keep that in mind. For me, that's a con. Something else that I had found previously confusing in the older version was that there was a develop, an edit, and a layers modules, and it wasn't clear when to use each and what they did. Now, if you just go to edit, you'll see that there's develop, effects, sky, portrait, and local. So you can do things like add a local adjustment if you want, which I've done, I think, here to darken the door. So I used it like a graduated filter to darken the door. You can add local adjustments, or you can actually add a layer. right? So if I go up here, I can add a layer from a file, meaning I can add a texture, or I can do a double exposure, or if you're blending layers, you can add another image that way. So it seems that they've incorporated everything into one place now, that once you're in the edit module, you can do all of those things. Another con I mentioned previously was that the presets, previews, don't show up on the image when you hover over the thumbnails. But you can view the thumbnails larger, like this, so that you can get a better idea of which one you might want to click on and try. So I would say that this was a con that has been slightly improved. Another item which I considered a con previously was their HSL tool. It's actually a filter called color adjustment, which is in itself a little confusing. So if I open this tool, you can see that there are various different colors, and you can click on each of the colors and adjust them for hue, saturation, and brightness, which is HSL. It does have a targeted adjustment tool now, and you can click on the item and adjust the brightness, the saturation, or the actual color. So if I want to give her a completely different color top, you can do that. You just have to change the tool here. So it wasn't quite intuitive, but it wasn't that hard, and they've now improved this tool to be a lot more usable. I would put this in the plus column. The final tool that I gave a critique on previously was one for chromatic aberration. I'm just going to find an image that I know has an issue with that and pop it into the edit module. Once the image is open in the edit panel, I've gone down to the lens correction. And if I do a quick before and after, you can see that it's actually applying something. So it's trying to find the correct lens and correct the distortion, among other things. However, it's chosen the wrong lens. This was actually shot with a Tamron 17-35. So I'm just going to go and find the correct lens from the list. So if it doesn't find yours, you have the ability to do that. And now you can see it's correcting the distortion. The issue that I had previously still exists, and I'm going to zoom in even farther just so that you can see what I'm talking about. What I'm looking at here is this color fringe, or this purple edge on the side of the building. This is known as chromatic aberration or a color fringe. It appears in two different instances, and if you get this from a lens that's super wide, that's maybe not as high quality as a more expensive lens, it's generally a fault of the lens, and you can correct it usually with a click of a button. Lightroom and Luminar both have that ability. Here it seems to be doing it automatically when you choose the lens, but you can see it's not getting rid of it. So there's a slider here for color fringe, purple, and even if I slide it all the way, that's as far as it goes, you can see that I've still got that color tint there. So it's not doing a great job, and I don't have the ability to adjust it any further based on the lens correction panel. So I would say that this one still needs a bit more work. I'm going to make a couple of quick adjustments here because I want to show you what happened when I made some changes to this image. And then I just decided, okay, I'm done. I want to go back to the grid screen or the browse view. So I just hit G on my keyboard. I'm going to click browse up here, and it pops up and it asks me if I want to save a Photoshop document. And I thought that was kind of odd. So I said cancel. So I'm going to do the same thing and walk you through so that you can see what actually occurred. It took me back to the browse module in the album that I created for this demonstration, but you can see the Cuba picture that I just worked on is not there. If I go down in this panel over here, you can see what you worked on recently. So if I try clicking on that, that was this one here, it pops up this little dialog box like it's looking for it, and it ended up crashing my program. It was like this for a really long time, and I had to force quit the program. You can see that the image did finally open in the background, but it was not responding for quite some time. And when I checked my utility, it showed me that it was using a lot of RAM, and it was literally out of memory. Now I have a fairly new MacBook Pro with all the bells and whistles and 64 gigs of RAM, as you can see, and it still ran out, and all I was doing was looking for a past file. I found the program to be a bit sluggish on a few instances like this. I'll share more with you when I get to the full list of cons. By now you may be thinking that I hate this entire program and there's absolutely no redeeming qualities. That's not entirely true. So let's get to some of the pros. What are the things that I found to be good about this program? I mentioned earlier that there's an HDR module. Here you can see that I used the 3 images below in the thumbnail strip to merge them together to create this one. And it did a really good job of merging them seamlessly and quite quickly as well. So that's definitely a pro. I also mentioned earlier that there's an HDR feature, and it too works very well. You can see that I merged the 3 images below in the thumbnail strip in the HDR module to create this final image. I also used the sky swap, which is what they call their sky AI, to replace the sky in this image just to see how well it would work and cut out around the trees. Let's take a closer look. You can see that it's done a really good job blending this new sky in amongst the trees, which is quite a complex task. So it did a pretty good job here. It didn't do quite as good a job on some other images that I tested. I'll show you that when I get to the cons. The other thing it did not do as well as, for example, Luminar AI with their sky replacement is the reflection. Let's take a look at the image without the sky swap. You can see that there's a little bit of clouds in the original sky, and they are shown in the water below as well. When we turn on the sky swap, it hasn't replaced them in the water. So it hasn't recognized that that needs to be done. So it's not the best job, and I couldn't figure out how to even get that to happen. So the pro is that the HDR tool module works really well and gives you a nice natural looking image. The Sky Swap AI, what I understand is it's brand new, so this is their first iteration, and I expect that there will be improvements coming to it in future upgrades. So I would list both of those as a pro with a few tweaks to come. Another big pro that a lot of people will be excited about is that you can actually use On1 Photo Raw 2022 as a base for other Photoshop plugins. For example, if you have any of the following, if you have alien skin plugins, Nik Collection, Skylum such as Luminar, any version of Luminar, you'll notice that I have Luminar 4 as well as Flex still installed. So if you are still back a version on Luminar, you can actually use that as a plugin for On1. Likewise with all the Topaz products. So this is a big plus if you're looking for a product to replace Photoshop with and still use your plugins that you've already purchased. Another huge plus is the addition of On1's NoNoise AI tool inside of On1 Photo Raw. I have it activated now, and you can see that my ISO was quite high on this image at 6400. So you can see that there's quite a lot of grain. I'm actually going to zoom in even more so that you can see it really well. You can see there's a lot of noise, especially on this smooth area of the wall. Watch what happens when I turn on the noise reduction. Look how amazing that is. That is literally unprecedented. I've never seen a tool do this good of a job, even Topaz DeNoise. So I'll have to put it through its paces a little bit more, but I'm really impressed with this tool. Big pro. If you like creating stylized looks like this, including a texture overlay and a border or edges on your image, it's easy to do with On1 Photo Raw. These are filters that you can find in the Effects tab. You can see the borders and textures are easily applied just like a filter. So that's a pro. If you want to be able to edit the metadata, such as adding your name as a copyright holder or adding some keywords, you can do that using On1 Photo Raw 2022. You can also do batch file renaming and batch process, as well as export. So these are all great pros. I mentioned the export tool, and if I open that export panel, you can see that you can actually choose from a number of different presets. And this is a really cool one that I'm kind of excited about. is you can actually do multiple exports in different sizes and file formats simultaneously. That's really cool. There's a few more things I would add to the list of pros, but I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on them here. Just know that you can create custom brushes, add a watermark when you export your images, create a luminosity mask with a click of a button, and even copy it to another layer or another filter, as well as doing focus stacking and time-lapse that I mentioned earlier. So those are all great things to have in a photo editing program. Okay, so now we've covered the things that are new and improved since last time I looked at this program, and some of the pros. Now let's get down and dirty and look at the cons and see what's not so great. Please keep in mind that this is my opinion, and my opinion is going to be biased based on my experience and the things that I'm looking for a photo editing software to do. You may find that you use this program and you love it, and the things that I dislike about it are the things that you love the most. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. It's just that, my opinion. The first con would be that I still find the interface somewhat confusing and a little bit disorienting. I already mentioned that I had trouble finding the history panel, as well as turning off these inner panels. Another thing I had trouble with is figuring out how to find images. I had flagged a few images as favorites and I could not figure out where to go and see them. So under this panel, part of the reason I couldn't find them was this panel was not showing. Once you have this panel open, you've got a Browse tab and a Catalog tab. You can look at folders that you've cataloged, and there's the Advanced Search. This is where you can tell it to show only liked or favorited images, as well as star ratings and so on. For me, it wasn't super intuitive, and I couldn't find this search tool without once again referring to the manual. Along the same lines, I also found that navigating from one folder to the other or going back to an image that you previously edited, I found that to be a little bit confusing and clunky as well. Up here you'll see the three tabs, My Catalogs and Browse. Also on the side, if I hover over, I can open my desktop, go to my default browser location, see my catalog folders, which also seem to be right here, go to the local drives, cloud, see my albums, which are also right here. So it seems like there's some duplication, and I would have to do some reading or watch some videos to learn a little bit more about the navigation. So I would put this in a con because it's taking me a little more time to learn and figure out just how to navigate the program than I would have liked. This next one for me is just a minor pet peeve, and it's just the names of things. I have trouble finding the histogram. Once again, I searched for it, and as you can see, nothing was found. So I had to go to the manual to resort to how to locate it, and it turns out it's over here on this tab, and it's called Levels. But if you hover your mouse over, it says Show the histogram. So I wish they would just be consistent with the terminology that the industry uses. This next con for me is about the actual file structure of the program itself. Things like, where is it saving? Is there a catalog or a database? And it turns out that it kind of has a combination of both, because it makes thumbnail previews so that you can see the images here on the screen, but it also tends to make sidecars along with your raw files and then duplicates On1 file formats. Let me show you an example. This image here is an HDR that I made from a set of bracketed images, and you can see that is an On1 file format. Then I went and added some of the effects that I showed you earlier, and it actually created a new file. Let me show you the two images in my file browser. Here you can see that there's the original raw file, which is the Fuji RAF file, and then there's three that have been created by On1. So there's an HDR .on photo file. Then there's a copy of that one that's quite large, 50 megabytes. And then there's another one, which is a .on numeral 1 file extension. These seem to be dedicated file formats to the On1 Photo Raw program, And once again, I'm going to have to go do a little bit more research and learn about those formats. So I'm not sure whether to call this a con or not. For me, it is, because it's one more thing that's different that I have to go learn. But Photoshop and Luminar also have their own proprietary file formats. So I think if you're new to the program or new to editing to begin with, your learning curve is going to be the same no matter which program you start with. Remember I mentioned speed earlier and told you about how the program got hung up on one particular task? I want to show you something else that seemed to take forever as well. This is the application support folder for On1. And you'll notice that I've got several different folders for old versions, but there's also several for this version, including Sandbox, Resize, Extras, and Common. So there seems to be a lot of files that go along with the program that get stored in this folder, which is again common to Photoshop as well. The size of this entire folder, including all versions, currently is 3 gigabytes. And I want to show you what happens to this when I catalog another folder, okay? Because I had cataloged a few and I found that it was taking a really long time, and by accident it was cataloging my entire hard drive of 150 some thousand images, and it was creating a really big file. So I'm going to catalog one folder of images. Let's just pick one of my tour folders. So I'm going to catalog this one. Okay. So when you click open, it starts cataloging, and it's supposed to give me an option to size the thumbnails. Now you can see that it did not. And this is what happened the first time. It's making standard size thumbnails in the background is what I surmised. I had to take to Facebook on the user groups again to figure out how to stop it, because what was happening is it was indexing everything on my hard drive and the folder was just getting bigger and bigger. When I stopped it previously, I was already up to 25 gigabytes and I had no idea how much longer it was going to take or how many images it was going to catalog or what the file size was going to be. So I put a stop to it by just clicking remove from cataloged folders. So once I did that, it seemed to put things to a stop and deleted all of the previews, put the folder back to a normal size. I did find that if I used the Browse tab and navigated to that same folder by right-clicking and choosing Make Cataloged Folder, then I got the dialog box. So I thought it was very interesting that when I chose the plus button over here, which I can't do at the same time, when I chose to go from here, it did not give me the choice of choosing my preview size. So if you want to control that, make sure that you go from here, not from the plus button. To me, that seems like a bug, so I put that in the cons. I mentioned earlier that the program can be sluggish at times. Just changing from one image to the next, one that's already been edited, took a really long time, in my opinion. You get this little progress bar down the bottom, and you can see how long it's taking just to open this file and apply the edits. Luminar AI and the newly introduced Luminar NEO both have Portrait AI, and it does a really good job. I've got videos on that. If you want to watch those, just click on the link in the description below. Photoshop also has its version now called Neural Filters, and in my opinion, they're not as good. I'm kind of in the same camp with this version. So On1 has Portrait AI, and I'm just going to turn it on and show you how it works. You know, I've gone to an extreme here, as you can see, because I wanted to show you what happens with this tool, because it's really easy to go too far and make a big giant mess. Okay, so let me turn it off again. So she doesn't even look like herself. The face is completely turned into mud, and the eyes and the lips just look bizarre. So I'm going to dial a few of these things back a little bit, okay? But I want to show you one in particular, and that's the slim face. So watch what happens, and watch all the way around her head when I put the slim face back to a normal width of her head. It's actually pulling in the entire image beside her. Okay, so it's not really separating it from the rest of the image, which looks really bizarre. Okay, so I wouldn't want to use this one. The cool part here is that you can adjust the eye size separately. So you can adjust the left eye from the right eye and adjust their size separately, which is really handy if somebody has a lazy eye or is slightly turned from the camera and one eye appears slightly smaller. Under the retouching details, this is where it gets a little sketchy. So I've turned it all up to 100% so that you can see sort of what kind of mess you can make. Okay, if I dial the blemishes down and the smoothing sliders down, okay, it comes back to something normal. You can also see that I've gone way too far with the eye whitening, so I'm going to scale that back a little bit as well. And you can see here the dark circle slider is supposed to be affecting under the eye, but look where it's affecting. It's actually going under her eyebrows. So it thinks that the dark circles are under her eyebrows, not under her eyes. One thing that is cool is that you can actually select the eyes. So you can move this around, place it right on the pupil, and then adjust the shape of the eyes separately. So you can really get a precise location for the eyes. Now this can actually be a pro or con. If you really want something that's automated, this is less automated than, say, Luminar AI that finds the eyes and does a really good job for you. I find here with the retouching, the blemish slider really just smooths the skin. It's not actually looking for imperfections in the skin and removing them. She's got some blemishes up on her forehead and her cheek, and it's really not getting them. It's just blurring. And if I go to the nth degree again, it's just blurring the whole face and it looks bizarre. So again, while this tool is kind of neat and it has some cool features, you can also adjust where the mouth is positioned and so on. I think that it's a work in progress. So unfortunately, I would put the Portrait AI tool in the con list, possibly even in the ugly list. I wasn't super impressed. Another thing I noticed is that it also has a hard time finding smaller faces. So if you're dealing with a full-length portrait like this one, it struggles a little bit. Watch what happens when I click the portrait tool. So this is happening real time. It's looking for the faces, and I found in a couple of instances where it was full-length portraits like this and the faces were small, it actually never did find the faces. So I had to stop it and cancel out and do it manually. It does give the option of clicking on that tool, and then you can size it and place it on each face, for example, like this one. And then the other face. So you can actually retouch and adjust each face separately, which is very nice. However, I also found that if I clicked it by accident on an image like this that doesn't have any people in it, it still looked for the faces and ultimately ended up crashing the program once again. If there is not a face in the photo, it should gray out the tool and not even allow you to click on it. One other thing that I wish this tool did is brighten or colorize the irises. The detail slider just makes the iris and the eye sharper, but you can't actually brighten just the iris. And the brightness slider tends to make it look like she's wearing an inverted mask. So again, in summary, I think this tool has some potential and has some good features, but it needs a little bit more work. I want to mention just a couple of last things. Remember I mentioned earlier that Photoshop has a steep, straight up learning curve? Well, I feel that On1 Photo Raw is pretty steep as well. And if you are brand new to photo editing or to this program, I think you're going to have to put in some time to spend learning the program itself. On that note, they do have a pretty extensive user manual that is helpful. There's also a support forum, and as I mentioned, I found some Facebook groups to get help as well. But if you're looking for video tutorials, the On1 YouTube channel itself is very limited. just quick tips, a minute or two. If you want extensive education by video, you'll either need to find somebody else's channel that teaches it, buy a course, or pay for the On1 Plus annual membership. So this in itself could be a con as well. The last thing I want to show you is, again, half pro and half con. It sits sort of in the middle, and that's their Sky Swap AI. I changed out the sky in this image, which was completely washed out, and you can see that it did okay. However, if I increase the full opacity and zoom in a little bit, you'll see that it's done some strange masking things up at the top here, and I actually had to make an effort to blend it in using the masking tools. So it didn't mask very well, and you can see there's some halos and things around this section, and the sky horizon placement wasn't perfect out of the gate. Just to compare, this is one that I did in Luminar that I was able to blend much quicker and easier. You can see it's saving settings again, just changing from one image to the other. So for me, that's a little bit annoying. I did the sky replacement on this one in Luminar, and I think it looks more natural and it's better blended. And I didn't have to do manual masking myself. However, I mentioned that there was some pros. For example, if I want to, I can actually see the mask on here and copy it. So if I want to use this mask and do another effect on just the sky, I can use the same mask, which is very handy. But it still means that I have to do a little bit more work masking it manually myself using the masking tools, which means then I got to go learn how to use the masking tools. So for me, the point of AI, or the artificial intelligence, is for it to do most of the work for you, and I think it's only getting about halfway there. If you'd asked me a couple of years ago if I would be saying all this stuff about artificial intelligence and how I want more of it, I wouldn't have believed that was true myself. But using Luminar 4 and AI for the last couple of years, I've found it to be a big time saver. So yes, I guess I'm in the AI camp. Well, that went into a lot more depth than I originally intended, but I hope it helps you to form an opinion about On1 Photo Raw 2022. Let me summarize by giving you my thoughts on who I think this program would be ideal for and who I think it's not for. This program is for you if any of the following sound like this matches your workflow. You're currently using Adobe, Lightroom, or Photoshop in the subscription model, and you want to move away from that. In that case, you can purchase On1 Photo Raw outright and just pay the one-time fee. If you do decide to get the annual subscription for On1 Photo Raw, you save a little bit of money, and you get to keep the program even if you stop your subscription at a later date. That is not the same with Adobe. This program is also probably for you if you want advanced editing tools and something with all the bells and whistles. You want to be able to use layers and masks, do HDR, panoramas, focus stacking, the works. This could be the solution for you because it does everything. If you enjoy the editing process and you actually enjoy learning about photo editing techniques and about the software, then you will probably find this program enjoyable. This last one is for you if you jumped off the Skylum bandwagon when they switched from Luminar 4 to Luminar AI and swore that you would never buy another Skylum product. Then 100% this is something that you want to at least take a look at, because you can still use Luminar 4 as a plugin for On1 Photo Raw. You get the benefit of both worlds. And now my final list is who I would recommend not purchasing On1 Photo Raw. If you are a beginner photographer or you are new to photo editing, I would recommend or suggest that this is not the program for you. I would strongly urge you to look at Luminar AI or the new Luminar NEO instead. If you love Luminar and you have Luminar AI, or perhaps you've already purchased the Luminar NEO pre-order, then I would suggest stick with that. If, however, you're on the other end of the spectrum and you have Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop, the photographer's package, and you pay for the subscription monthly, and you enjoy using those products, so if you are in the same position as me and you use Lightroom and you have done so for a number of years, you probably will not enjoy On1 Photo Raw. And lastly, if you want to get in and out of your photo editing software as quickly as possible and as pain-free as possible, this is probably not the program for you. Once again, I would steer you towards a version of Luminar. I hope that gives you a good idea of the pros and cons of the On1 Photo Raw 2020 software as seen through my perspective. If you have any questions and you're still not sure if this is a program for you or not, put your question in the comment area below and I'll get back to you shortly. If you're a current user of On1 Photo Raw, put a comment below and let me know what are your favorite features. As soon as I get my hands on the new Luminar NEO, I'm going to be doing a three-way comparison between that, Luminar AI, and On1 Photo Raw. Watch for that video here. And until then, watch one of the videos suggested for you by YouTube. Until next time, take care and keep taking pictures.